Independence. When you look at independence, we look at it from the we'll touch on it on two specific areas, the political and the religious side, because those two intertwine. Because the only way to rule a nation is not only from the political way, but from the religious. Those two have to combine. Even when you look at scripture, you notice for any leader, they had to be very cautious, because if you can be able to control both the religious or the faith, at the same time, you can be able to control the people, because this is their belief system. This is the spiritual. If you can control the spiritual, then the political becomes easy peasy. And that is what we are witnessing. And I look at independence mostly from nations who have been colonized, or colonized colonized or faced war because of other so-called superior nations. You will notice something. Most are told that you're now independent, so you've been colonized for X amount of years. And during colonization, the colonizer will come and do so much damage that is human atrocities beyond your imagination. Things, if we speak on these social media platforms, I mean, they will try to silence it or numb it down. But the fact is, think of the worst of the worst, and that's colonization for you. Think of someone coming to your home and kicking you out and doing all manner of evil, then bounding you in chains, or whichever way you choose to look at it. Others taking your life, others thinking if we can reduce the men, then we can have access to the women, or we can do to the women whatever we want. Yes, I'm talking about the bad to the bad, to the worst to the worst. And at the same time, when you do this, they also look from the religious aspect, who are the pawns whom they can put. Now, back to the political side of it, is once they've been able to crash and numb down, and they have stolen and looted, they go back, these sort of colonizers, and they decide, okay, how do we control the nation without physically being on the ground? So they will choose puppet leaders. And these puppet leaders, they have to have a story. And they have to make a story and make them a hero. Now, during a fight for independence, there are many people who are involved. But there are two types of people. There's the real person who's fighting against it. And then there's the one who is quote unquote fighting. They have their own special interest. That is the face that will be given as your leader. That is the face you'll be given. That is why it's always very interesting that if you look at most nations and you look at the people who are called to be the ones who fought independence, most times, very rarely do we find the ones who really, really fought for it. Most times you have the face that we are given. And they always have a good storyline, and they're jailed and then they're released. But when you do a dive deep, you realize when they were jailed, they're not really jailed. They would move around. They'd have conjugal rights. They would do all those things. And then the one who really fought for independence, they have physical wounds. They have losses, families they have lost. And then the one who you given as the picture, their families thrive. You come to learn that they own bigger chunks of your country, and you're thinking, how does that show that independent? Because now, how do you own almost everything? Because they're the face, and then the rules. Because you need to look at it from this angle. We are never given the fine print of what are the documents during independence. We really never know the nitty-gritties that were agreed upon during independence. We really don't know what it is. We don't know the language that was used. We don't know if the language used was a bit conk, to say the least. We don't know what was said, and we don't know the fine tuning of it. All we know, we have what we are being told. We're given independence. So we don't know what independence really entailed and what are the wording. And once that happens, already they've signed the treaties, they've done whatever they've done, but what you never know is what is against the people who should be actually independent. And so this independence becomes a word or a paper. And I'm sure if we find legal people and we tell them, hey, look at this document called independence, and from your legal expertise, is this nation independent? And I'm sure they will look at you and laugh and say, what are you talking about? There's no independence here. And so a nation is deluded to believe they are free. But when you sit back and look at whoever are these leaders being placed, realize they get away with so much and there are no one to stop them. They can come, take land, take this, take that, and then they will support like 2 or 3 communities, so that if you have more communities to fight that are fighting, these other 3 will remain to be the most loyal. And they say, no, us, we have food us. But there's a bigger chunk that is suffering. And that's one thing we notice. That's across globe. That's not within just a country. That's something we notice among every country or every nation that faced quote unquote independence. And then now the ones who have actually, actually fought for independence, now the real heroes, the real men and women who have the scars, who have everything, they are disseminated. They are crushed, they are tortured, they go through all the inhumane and barbaric acts, and they make sure their history is suppressed. They make sure their families have no information. They make sure their families even don't exist. They make sure they've scattered them so much to an extent nobody knows the truth. And the people who know the truth, because of the trauma, because of everything, they leave this world with all the information. Maybe a few of them will be able to pass it over to the next generation, and hopefully the next generation will pass it to the next generation. But it doesn't happen that common. There are a few here and there situations where you can get the real information. But even when this information is being passed, whoever is passing it has passed from the point of they've least maybe their end of time in life, and they're looking, okay, what's the worst that could happen? I'm still living the world, so I might as well just share this information. So information is power. It's power depending on who holds the power. Now, for the nation that has colonized, they'll make sure they give you their history, not your history. So they've given you the person who's the hero, and then they give you the interpretation thereof. And then they're thinking, to disorganize these people, let's have them come to our country. But you can't force them directly. So here comes the passport and the visas. And so you go to this country and you're thinking, yep, I got the opportunity of a lifetime. And then they make the visas very strict and very lean, to an extent that you still is like within a parameter. Even if you move within this country, still within particular parameters. And then they make sure if you've never married, you marry. If married, they'll find some. As in, there'll always be a control system. And eventually, once they're able to get what they're looking for, once they're able to, so once you have your visas and everything, so you think you're good, right? But this is how you choose to look. This is how you look at it. When you're an immigrant to the host nation, it's like a tenant and a landlord. So the tenant will be the immigrant, the landlord will be the host. In practical terms, a tenant, it doesn't matter how much they furnish a house or anything. The landlord does not care. I gave you a house that was like this. I only expect it to be better. And when you're living that house, the tenant, the landlord will charge you. Will charge you if there are any damages or anything, and even anything that you added off that wasn't there originally. Now, if we are to change now the approach of now you in this foreign nation at the host nation, they can decide that fine, they've used your talent, you've been able to build up and everything. Now you have no value. Now, depending on God's grace, you might end up being, absorbed, and they won't bother you, and they will tell you just shut up and just go to some corner, and you move on with their life. Or, like what's happening right now, they will tell you go back where you came from. Mind you, by the time you are leaving that country, you had sold things to be able to get the money and everything. And let's say worst case scenario, you haven't really, gained a lot of wealth or money to be able to even pay back where you came from, because let's say you have major loans. And so now you're in this stuck situation. Or let's say on a different scenario, you did have the money, but you never invested home. You never found a space. You don't need to invest. You can invest in your country, but you can look for a place where you can fit in well. Let's say you never did that math. When they're kicking you out, all those properties, those cars and everything, they will take it. And that's what's happening right now. And we can look at nations right now, what's happening. The so-called host nations are now telling people, go back where you came from. And someone is thinking they started like this, and like they really don't care. And you know, if a host nation can just wake up, send people, and call you an illegal, even with all the documentation, see, if they come to your house and they take your legal documents and they withhold it and they claim that you're illegal, who will believe you? And they put you or confine you in a place where you can't have someone at the legal defender being where you are. You have no voice. So it is easy for them to give a story and everyone will believe, but no one will believe you. They won't believe you, one, because of your race, your ethnicity. It's like the concept that was used from the Bible when you look at Joseph and Potiphar's wife. Nobody questioned Potiphar's wife because she was Egyptian. But because Joseph was Hebrew, they were like, it has to be, she has to be right. But no one did the questioning. No one questioned that this could be wrong. So same logic applies. And when they do that, or the way Belshazzar was dealing with Daniel, despite the age of Daniel being quite older than him, Belshazzar never recognized Daniel and would call him. When he called him under the context of his age. No, sorry, from the context of him being like a slave, which originally that was who Daniel was. But he had, grown up, the ranks and everything, but he was being called from the slave, from the historical side. So that's the thing that will always happen to a host nation. They will never call you looking at you from you being a person. They'll always look at you from you being either a commodity or a product or something less valuable. Them looking at you from a superior point of view. Yes, let's say even if you get married or are married, you get married or whichever you look at it. They can use the concept of Delilah, whereby they tell you, hey, we want this person, we want you to take everything from this person. So you just say he did ABCD or she did ABCD. And one day you're from work and everything, you have cops at the door and everything, and you're told you do domestic violence or any other accusation. But because there's no one to validate it on your end, the cases have been placed on you, they're so heavy, by the time you figure it out, you're already locked up. And they're telling you, hey, you have two options for you. Go back where you came from, or we lock you up. Well, you have to choose go back where you came from, and when you arrive where you're coming from, you don't even know where to start. And that's how it works with the nations that all will colonize other nations. The inhumanity never ends from the moment they stepped into your country. The inhumanity proceeds even after that. And they'll always wake up and they will never recognize the efforts you made, even while you are still under them. No, they're like, you are working for us, you are ours, and we do. And let's look at right now. So not only do we have the Western nation, we have some of the Gulf nations where they're coming back to nations like Africa and other nations, and they're saying, hey, we are buying all the lands that you have. But the people of these nations have no clue what's going on, because they will sell you, we are giving you employment, domestic worker employment. I mean, are you telling me a nation will always produce domestic workers? There are so many other professions, but they're very keen on which jobs they give. And when you're saying, oh, our people are getting jobs and everything, behind the scenes, you are losing. Your national parks are being you are being drained. With this carbon credit kind of games being played, your forests are gone and everything is gone. And because you never know, these things are done behind the scenes. And when a nation wants to come and pillage a nation in this day and age, they will come through NGOs. Have you ever noticed that many countries that face war or are going through the after war, they always have so many, or a nation that has many issues with political instability, have you noticed that it has so many NGOs, but you can never tell what these NGOs are doing? You'll have one is for humanitarian, other is geological. There are always so many things they do that you're thinking, but no one vets them. And most people, you've gotten a job, I work as a cook for this, or I work as an accountant for this. So people are like, hey, you just get the jobs, and then you ignore what's happening behind the scenes. Because most of them work under the shell of the country that took over from your country. So they are just the proxy of the major nation. And sometimes when these countries, they want to move up a notch in their evil, they start proxy wars. They pin one ethnic tribe versus another ethnic tribe, one race versus another one race. It's all about the control. How does war work? For example, you have a country that has built up the weapons, and they want to use it to steal, to loot in another nation. What do you think they will do? They'll have the weapons given to these other nations. And once they've given the weapons to this other nation, they sit back and watch as they take out each other. They're like, hey, my ABCD kind of gun is working on this one, so it can shoot like this. You saw through that clip. Oh, so you saw this. And then they will come as heroes and send their, the best team military. But even the best team military, when they sit back, those who logically look at things from a truth seeker point of view, they realize, no, even they themselves are being used. Because let's say they get injured within that war, what happens to them? So they go back, they will not be sorted out their medical and everything. And now they're even poorer. So even the mission they did, they were looted. There is nothing for them. The game never ends. Now let's look at it from the spiritual point of view. They also choose who is your leader or giving the sermon, and they come the fund. So let's say it's the church and they need funding in building up and everything. They say, fine, we have no problem. We don't want you to build hospitals. We don't want you to build any other. We just want you to have a church built. Now, the issue is not the church built. The issue is the how enormous these churches are built. You can put up a very simple structure, build it up, stone and everything, fine. But there's these ones that are very almost dystopian to an extent. You're thinking, do you really need a lift in this church? Do you really need this? Do you really need that? You don't need most of these things. And that's why the game is being played. And then they say, because you can control them spiritually, let's do projects for them and build them homes. And so they try using most of these churches, and the purpose they've put, build like a gated community, the flats and all, the supermarkets, the school. And so for the congregants, they're thinking, these people care about us. This church, this person, this man of God, fine. And then the control starts, because now this individual whom you've given glory more than God has more power now. Now they have power over your finances, because when you will come to this community, there'll be rules, there'll be regulation. So now you are now in a cult like, and you want to know this, you have to look at many of the quote-unquote religious leaders or faith leaders who have a cult-like following, whereby anytime you confront and hold them accountable, there's this word that always you'll always hear things like, I'm forgetting the wording, touch not the anointed. But I needed to go to scripture and look at the context of touch not the anointed. It is always been misused and misrepresented by many religious leaders or faith leaders to be able to exact power and to get away with things they have done. And since they have a cult-like following, people will be able to say, this is my person. There's this thing you'll hear, they have like bodyguard kind of situation. Look at it this way. Our Lord Jesus Christ used a donkey. But at no point do we see the disciples acting like there is military personnel. He literally used to leave them and disappear. But look at these cult-like churches or following. When this so-called servant of God is preaching, there's a crew that stands behind them. You'll see men in suits. And then you can't even approach the person directly. Even from the gate up to there they are. And then there'll always these men who always standing up like they're always more anointed than the others. And then you can't say anything against that person. Literally, these cult-like following people can hunt you down, track you, and do the worst of the worst. And if that leader has gone astray, no one can tell them, you know what, because that's their God, small g-O-D. And then you start hearing the words like, we are going up a mountain, we are going, and you're thinking, Bible, mountain, huh? The math isn't mathing. Because now you've controlled people spiritually. So now back to the political side of things. The nation that wants to control, now it has not only controlled people politically and religiously. So how do we get out of these messes? One, we need to expose these issues more and more and hold people accountable. When people get exposed, they start to think of the next move. So every move they make, if it's a political leader, every project they've done, if it's these nations that have been colonizing and they're still now moving to other forms of colonizing, for example, how they impose crazy sanctions or they impose crazy interests, expose that, expose everything. If a political leader, look at their track record. Have they accountability, or these are people who just, they have done evil? If someone has a history of execution and when they get into power, they'll only, move their country to a mafia nation. So you have to hold them accountable. There has to be civic education for all generations, from the older generation, the boomer generation, to the generation alpha. Because the only way to control a nation is information. So because history can be distorted by the one who is in power, the history that you have, because you are fortunate enough now to have sadly have to unlearn, and now you learn, pass in the history now that is real to the lower generation. So these ones now, they will not be able to be caught up where the boomers were caught up. Now they have information. Hold every leader accountable. It doesn't matter across the board, political, religious, it doesn't really matter. Hold them accountable. If there are projects and they do and things that are to be exposed, let them be exposed. You have these situations where you go to some churches and they say they have schools. Good. But have you ever noticed the schools are very expensive? So who are the people who go to these schools? Is it their students from that church? No, I don't think so. Because it's too expensive for the commoner to be able to go there. They impose tithes and offering. It's become like a budget. If you pay the little coin you have an issue. You have to have money. And if you don't have, they always say you don't pray much, you don't have more faith. And you're thinking, how is that even scriptural? It's not. These are games being played to control. So the only way to, unravel all these things and untangle from it is expose. Don't sugarcoat your words. Stand up for the truth, even if it will cost you your life. Stand up for what's real. Protect those who cannot be able to speak and speak on their behalf. And hold everyone accountable. Expose and let there be a lot of civic education across the board. If you're saying yourself you're a church leader and you want to build a church or a sanctuary, how much, why are you building something so enormous as if you're building the Tower of Babel? Put something, a simple structure, whichever areas people are supposed to, but your budget should not negate the fact that you have congregants who are suffering. If the people are unemployed, how are you helping them? Are you all trying to create opportunities for them? So everything has to make sense. There's no way you will tell me, and that is why politicians get away with a lot of things. Why? Because they can easily embezzle, they can easily money launder through churches, bring dirty money and it's washed through the churches and then moved into their shell companies. And because the church is never held accountable, the political leader will believe then they can do whatever they want. But if you hold the church accountable, because politics and religion intertwine, they always intertwine across. Look at history, look at scripture, they always intertwine. And if you have a corrupt religious leader or faith leaders, and you have a corrupt political leader, you cooked. No matter. And that's why you look at a nation, you'll hear some religious or faith leaders said, we've put an altar, we've raised an altar in this, I don't know, state house or whichever. And you are thinking, if you really raised an altar of God, how comes that leader is worse than they were before? Because the question is, what altar did they raise? Yeah. They never really raised an altar that honors God. They raised their demonic altars. Hence the bloodshed that comes afterwards. So, expose, civic education, hold everyone accountable is the only way to unlearn. And for the so-called nations that have, because when these nations, the colonizers come into a country, they start from the security, the military, everything, they control. How do you think budgets are done? Who do you think approves their budgets? It's the country that colonized you, sadly. And the saddest part, if you are then, the other painful part is you are now paying the countries that colonized you. It's like telling them, thank you for colonizing us, because now you're paying them back through their projects, through the money that's used, because they're saying your banks should be external banks. So the only way to be able to unlearn and untangle is civic education, exposing everything, and learning, and being able to pass the information that's now that has been well filtered and that's now the real information to the other generations, so that they don't become victims of what was you being a victim. That's the only way to get out of this all. That's the only way to come out of this so-called independence that was never there in the first place. But until we sort that issues, we'll be kicked against each other through through ethnicity, through race, and then hence the xenophobia kind of characters, hence all this cleansing and all this nonsense. When someone sits on the top and they're throwing new crumbs and they're all fighting for each other. I hope people do wake up and think.